So, by way of introduction, Victoria Lee wrote 22 books before her first one was published.
That's true.
Yeah. She grew up in Durham, North Carolina, where she spent her childhood writing ghost stories and fantasizing about attending boarding school. She has a PhD in psychology, which she uses to overanalyze fictional characters and also herself. Victoria is the author of A Lesson in Vengeance, as well as The Fever King and its sequel, The Electric Air. She lives in New York City, and 2 books forthcoming in 2023.
At least one.
At
The
least
other
one.
one I need to rewrite.
Okay. Gotcha. Well, if we hold her to it, we might get 2 books, but at least one. That's good news, yeah. And Ryan La Sala writes about surreal things happening to queer people. Ryan grew up in a suburb of Connecticut with his 3 siblings and 3 parents. He studied anthropology and neuroscience at Northeastern University in Boston, but then, I like this, then he got serious and started writing books about drag queens, sorceresses, and costume contests.
Yeah, that's true.
Ryan resides in New York City, but only physically. He spends most of his time in the astral planes and only takes up corporeal form for special occasions like brunch and to watch anime. I didn't write this, by the way.
I didn't write it either.
And luckily for author events also. Ryan's previous books include Reverie and Bedazzled, or Bedazzled.
Yeah.
There we go. He's been featured in Entertainment Weekly, NPR, and Tour.com. His highly anticipated book, The Honeys, is a twisted and tantalizing horror novel set amidst the bucolic splendor of a secluded summer retreat, and it's out now. Now, Victoria Lee and Ryan La Sala.
Thank you so much. Hi everyone, I see some familiar faces. I see some new faces. It's good to see all of you. I have all 4 of my parents in the front row. So if I seem a little shocked, or if I seem like I'm sort of looking at the back row. I know, I sort of do this a lot, but
Just kind of cross your eyes.
yeah, like one of those like optical illusions where the pattern jumps out if you like lean back.
Right.
Yeah, that but in reverse. Yeah. Thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be in your home state.
I know. I mean, we're walking around and I was like, this is Connecticut, but Connecticut's a small state. So
He did say that as we were driving in.
I'm very proud. I'm very proud of Connecticut. But this is like a nice, cute little town.
Is this, would you say, like one of the top 3 towns of Connecticut?
I can't possibly say no to that with being a literal archangel. Yes, it is. Yeah, on all the
Dare
lists.
say the top town.
Probably the number 1. Yeah, then West Hartford. So I thought no.
We'll let that one slide.
Yeah. Off to a rough start.
So how does it feel to be 3 books in? This is like your 3rd published novel.
I'm really excited about it. I don't know what I thought was going to like happen in my mind. But yeah, I don't know. I like, what is this? So you also have written 3 books,
Yes.
or you've written many books, but you're on
Published
you're
3.
you're yeah. So what does that make us, like juniors in like the high school hierarchy,
Ooh.
right?
Yeah. I don't feel like a junior. I'm not ready to go to college.
I feel like I do, because I remember like with my first book I sort of had that like freshman attitude. Everything felt brand new. I was timid. My second book I thought like I could do anything. I was very sophomoric about it. And now I do feel like in my like 3rd book I feel like comfortable and confident and like I've got my like feet under me in a way that like has set me up for like, you know, whatever I want to do next. So I feel pretty good about it. What about you? How do you feel about my 3rd book?
How do I feel about your book? I feel like your books keep getting better and better.
Oh, thank God.
I like that you've explored so many different genres, and I'm kind of excited to see where you go from here. I mean, this is like very much a kind of genre and vibe blend. It's got this like sun-drenched, summery summer camp, very colorful, very floral, but it's also a horror book. And so I mean, one of the questions that I did actually have written down, even though I'm kind of doing this bit off the cuff, is how did it feel to write this kind of like genre and vibe blend, and like what were you thinking about? What were your inspirations for that?
Yeah, so, you know what might be helpful? Should we tell people what our books are about? Just so people are
I
like,
mean,
maybe.
I was
Yeah.
hoping you were like famous and maybe
Are we famous enough? Do
Are
you guys know
we?
what
No.
Turns out we're gonna have to tell them. So, yeah, 'cause this is sort of a good lead-in to talking about themes. because you and I are sort of two sides of the same coin of like dark academia and bright academia.
Yes.
And like which I would love to chat with you about, but we should explain. Why don't you go first? Tell us what A Lesson in Vengeance is, because I think
God. Okay.
you haven't had to pitch this in a long time. I know.
It's not too long ago for me to be doing this. So yeah, this is A Lesson in Vengeance. It's basically like a lesbian dark academia. It's set in a girls' boarding school in the Catskill Mountains, and it follows this girl Felicity who has finally returned to school a year after her previous girlfriend's untimely death. And when she returns, there's a new student named Ellis, who is this famous, prodigious author, very pretentious, very mysterious, very alluring, and Felicity gets kind of swept up in this cult of personality around Ellis. And as she's being drawn into Ellis's orbit, she's also trying to disentangle what happened to her girlfriend and like her own potential role and culpability in her girlfriend's death, as well as like the legacy of these witches that allegedly used to live at their school and allegedly died there on the grounds of the dorm that she lives in. And all of it kind of comes together. I would say it's like about grief, but it's also about like pretentiousness and lesbians.
I mean, I'm sold. I love it. I mean, I blurred this book. You know that I love
Yes.
it. But, the reason I wanted you to bring it up is because, similarly, The Honeys is about a person, fueled by grief, going to the Catskills and discovering that things are not what they seem. So, The Honeys is about a gender-fluid teen named Mars who wakes up one night in his bed and his sister is trying to kill him. And in the ensuing struggle, and this is like a total surprise because she was away at summer camp, but in the ensuing struggle, Mars accidentally kills her instead, thus propelling him on a sort of journey to kind of figure out what exactly possessed his sister to attack him, what she was doing home from camp so suddenly when she'd only left a few weeks prior. And this leads Mars back to the summer camp where his sister was staying, which is it's called the Aspen Conservancy. It's a summer camp in the Catskills, and specifically this leads Mars to this group of girls called the Honeys. They're sort of like the really rich, popular, glamorous girls of this camp. They sort of are treating summer camp more like a vacation. They don't really fraternize with anyone else. They only sort of keep to themselves, and they sort of exert this pressure against many of the people. They sort of have this hypnotizing spell, and the only person that seems to be immune to it is Mars, because Mars is propelled by grief and revenge and sort of thinks that they have some sort of connection to his sister, who was being initiated into the Honeys sort of when she lost it. And Mars doesn't really buy that story. He thinks something was happening sort of out in the woods, unseen by the adults, and he thinks it has something to do with the Honeys, and specifically the honeybees that the girls tend behind their cabin, for which they're named. Yeah. The reason that I thought it'd be fun to explore sort of these two things is because you're asking me about the bright floral nature of the book, yet it's a horror book, and I feel like when writing in the tradition of dark academia, right, dark is sort of right in the title. And I think when I sort of sat down to do this, I wanted to write something that had a lot of the structure of a gothic horror. If you ever read anything that's gothic horror, it tends to be a person traveling to some remote location to rescue somebody, right, or to look for their sister or something, and then they get wrapped up in vampires or what have you. And academic horror sort of has a lot of that stuff too. It's usually someone in a secluded area, and they're entering into academia, which has all these hierarchies, and they're learning how to transgress those things. And so I kind of wanted to take that similar narrative, but I wanted to paint it in colors that maybe hadn't been used before. Things that were bright, things that are floral, things that are pastel. And what I ultimately got was do it at a summer camp where it's always bright, where the sunlight is inescapable. And that eventually led me to writing about, a type of monster that can stalk you in broad daylight, which ultimately I think is kind of scary, especially when we're used to monsters sort of jumping out from the dark. What about you? How did you sort of decide on the palette of your book?
I mean, mine was much more straightforward because it was just I read Secret History and liked it, the vibe.
Yeah.
I think your approach is very interesting to me because it does blend so many different things that you wouldn't expect to go together, right? But then they do. This idea of something being able to attack you in bright light is terrifying to me, and was terrifying to me about this book, because I don't know if you've ever watched Doctor Who.
I've seen some of it, but tell me, keep going.
Okay, so there's this like one episode where there's a creature that, so it's kind of the opposite, and it does like live in shadows, but it can only get you when you're in the shadow. And so in some ways, like even if you're in the bright day, if you just cross like the shadow from like this chair, it can live there and it can get you and it can devour you. And like that specific thing of like there is no real escape because like it could be lurking even in the very mundane is terrifying to me. It was one of like the biggest like, allures of your book.
Something that I've always found to be kind of captivating is like, I don't know, like part of why I wanted to make the monsters in this book sort of the kind that can sort of travel through light and sort of appear in broad daylight is because I think oftentimes, like, I think of like my own summer camp experiences. And I had a mixture of experiences going to summer camp. I had some like really phenomenal like encounters with like nature and teamwork and like team building that I like really loved. And then I had some experiences at summer camp that were like really scary and like, you know, I look back and I'm like, oh, like that could have been like that could have gone like really wrong because I was like one of the only, you know, out queer kids at summer camp. And I sort of recognized that like a lot of the things that are allowed to happen to queer people, like the horrors that we encounter daily, happen often in broad daylight. Where I felt safest was at night in the dark by myself, the place that everyone else was scared. That's where I would hide. And, you know, it felt safe and secure because it was limited. It was just me. And I could sort of be anybody without light sort of always prying these secrets off of my body. But if I was out in the open, you know, suddenly it was separate by boys and girls for capture the flag, or like, oh, time for free swim, like shower up, boys. And suddenly I was in like a kind of perilous situation that didn't look like anything else to anybody else but me. Which is why it felt kind of like very intuitive to take this queer character, put them at a summer camp, and then put them in a position where they're sort of witnessing things that no one else seems to even really notice.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought about that, but now that you mention it, that makes complete sense, and I love the thought process you put into this and the care that with which you have approached like even these small details of the book, like the fact that you're setting in like in a summer camp, right?
I overthink everything, is what I do. What I learned.
I do know this about it.
I was more like you were. I was just like, well, I sort of felt this vibe. And actually, you know what? I kind of feel like I do operate off of vibes, and then I intellectualize it in reverse.
Yeah.
Like, during the revision process, or like, you know, more accurately, like when I'm eventually having to like answer interview questions, I'll have to like think of reasons for a lot of what feels like intuitive, and I'll just kind of come to these conclusions and then take credit for it later.
But that has happened to me before, especially with this book. People will be like, oh, why did you decide to like set it in the Catskills? I'm like, because they're creepy. I don't know,
Yeah.
something better than that.
Wait, for Dalloway, the school, it was like, was that based on a real place?
Oh
or?
no, absolutely not. I mean, I did like, there was like a school that was in the Catskills that I looked at for vague inspiration of like, I don't know what kind of architecture a girls' boarding school in the
So, like, the
Catskills
mechanics
would
of it?
have, right?
What about like the map? Because there's a map that.
Yeah, the map was mostly me like, one of the revision comments that I got in the book was like, I don't really like know where everything is on the campus, and so in addition to me like putting more thought into how I described the campus, it was also like, oh, you know what would be sick is if we had a map.
To like actually show them.
Yeah, and like it would be very ninth house, like, you know, to be able to see, like, especially when we did this really gothic style, like not only would it contribute to like, the atmosphere of the novel and like, the sense of place, but it would just be very cool, and I want one.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree.
That's a lot of my logic. But like speaking of, you know, having queer characters in central roles and focusing on like the queer experience of trauma and the uniqueness of that, all of your books highlight queer characters in these central roles. And so what's important to you about central queer characters in genre fiction?
These are like AP English questions.
Yes, I know.
These are so hard.
I expect you to be like an intro paragraph, 3 long paragraphs.
Yeah, like an expository essay.
Yeah.
Do you know, I'm going to talk about AP English instead. AP English, while I'm stalling and thinking of an actual answer. Did you do AP English? Did you have this? Okay. Do you remember what your question was on the AP exam? We spent a whole year learning about symbolism and Virginia Woolf and like lighthouse this, owl that, right? Like the deep literary symbols of the English language. And then when it got to the AP English exam, the question that we had to like argue, you know, we're all ready for something like really insightful, some like Walt Whitman bullshit. And it was instead, should we dissolve the penny?
What?
Yeah, that was my reaction too. Like, it was like, should we get rid of the penny? Like, You know what a penny is? You ever seen
Are
a
you sure
penny?
this wasn't AP Civics?
No, it was the penny, and they were like, all right, kiddos, like all of these like pretentious high schoolers in 11th grade who were ready to like put all their purple prose on paper. We had to talk about a penny for like 6 pages, handwritten. I couldn't believe
Well,
it.
I don't know, Ryan. Should we dissolve the penny?
I don't even remember what I said. I was like, it's nostalgic. We should definitely hold on to. I love pennies. They're lucky. Like I was grasping at straws, and I think I still did well. But to be honest, I blacked out a lot of that time. What was your question? Oh, why
I
should we
feel
say
like that's how
that?
you're gonna approach this one too.
Yeah, I'm blacking out currently.
Why do characters matter?
Okay.
Especially in genre.
Okay, especially in genre. So, I've long maintained that the point of a lot of my career is I seek to sort of center. I'm trying to kind of build like a new mythology around queerness, because if you look at like queer characters over the past like what?
What's a new mythology?
I'm telling you,
No, like what does the word mean?
mythology.
Oh, there's new mythology.
New mythology. You know, you're a PhD, so you're like making my words longer than they are. No, a like new mythology around like queer characters, because if you look at like famous queer characters, like they're either dying or they're like hyper perverted, or like they've got all of these other like functions in story other than like the hero or the victor, or just like a main character. And so a lot of my goal with the books that I write is writing stories that could only be told by queer characters. And so I haven't written so far a book that's about like coming out, and I don't think there's anything wrong with books that sort of tackle that, but a lot of my aim as an author is to write adventures that could only really happen to like a queer person. So like for instance, The Honeys is it's about Mars, who's this queer character, and he believes that the Honeys have something to do with his sister's death. And this is divulged very early on in the novel, but at the same time, he also kind of idolizes these girls. He's always envied his sister's ability to sort of be included in their ranks, you know, just because she's a girl, and Mars has always sort of wanted. Dad. Dr. Frank, everybody.
I warned him to put it out.
Did you, Mary?
Yes, I did.
Because you're going down with that ship.
My God.
You're so long.
And I
I'm
told
going to call you.
call me.
My stepmom and dad. Anyways, so Mars, by virtue of being like gender fluid, sort of arrives at this camp, which is set in a binary, right? There's a boys and a girls camp. There's no spot for someone who sort of doesn't fit into either. Mars is bunked with the boys, because that's where sort of Mars like most easily fits in, but really sees the Honeys as like this end goal. A, because they know what happened to his sister. B, because they knew his sister really well, and in his grief he's sort of trying to piece her back together via like the parts that he can find of the place that she spent the most of her time. C, he kind of wants to be one of them, and that creates a really kind of confusing motivation for a character that sort of starts out with revenge at heart, but ultimately is kind of having to try to figure out and counter that, you know, that really clear motivation with all of these potential distractions and things that could be placed in front of them to kind of cause them to lose the scent. So I've really enjoyed writing queer characters, and I've really enjoyed writing stories that like center queer characters, and I've always maintained that queer people in general have a lot more to do than sort of like curl hair and eyelashes, which is sort of what we get to do in a lot of like other books. I always wonder when I see a queer character in like Dumpling by like Julie Murphy, for instance. And I love Julie Murphy, but like I think there's drag queens in that, and they spend every moment on page like making like the girls feel good about themselves, and I'm like, I want to know where that drag queen goes after. Like, what is she up to after? What's her story? And so I kind of strive to like be the person to tell those stories.
And you do it very well. I mean, you've even had drag queen villainesses.
That's true.
Yes.
That's true, yeah. My first book, Reverie, has a drag queen as like the villain in it, and which is completely predicated on, yeah, exactly what I described. The idea that like probably most drag queens I know have like a much more ambitious agenda than simply like, you know, helping young high schoolers like get the guts to do the school play, right? Like, what's she doing after that? Like, that's what I wanted to know.
How many people is she assassinated?
Yeah, like, she's like, okay, Candace, like, knock 'em dead, sweetie, and then, like, you know, gets her violin case that has, like, a shotgun in it, and, like, goes off to her own battle. Like, that's what I wanted to write about. There's no character named Candace in those books.
It's the next book.
Yeah, this is Reverie 2. Write that.
One thing that I love so much, like as a non-binary person, right, about like reading this book is that it does so many cool things with gender. Like we talked about how Mars is gender fluid and how that impacts his experience of camp and being in this very binary environment.
Mm-hmm.
But also like the way that you've constructed gender for the boys at the camp and the honeys themselves is like very essentialist, right? Like the boys are always like, ooh, sports, and like the girls are always like, oh, like we're gonna like make flower crowns and like dance their field with their pinkies linked and like paint nails. Like that was such a strong choice to make, given that you have like a gender fluid character, to be like, okay, now we're gonna like have these cis people be extremely like stereotyped versions of their genders. And so I'm wondering, like, if you could talk more about like the intentionality behind that and like what you're trying to say about gender essentialism.
Oh my god, this is like AP English. So, yeah, I think a big point that, and Mars even like makes this point on the page. I used to sort of be coy about my reasoning behind things, but eventually I sort of learned that it's actually better if I have my characters kind of have these conversations. People have written in to like tell me that they've like learned a lot, like not having lived these experiences, and so I was like, oh, it's actually a great opportunity, teaching moment. And so Mars actually has a conversation with a friend in this book about how, you know, he uses the camp's lake as a metaphor, because the camp's lake is situated in the sense that like there's boys camp on one side and girls camp on another, and Mars sort of describes himself as like the raft, the thing sort of drifting back and forth, and it can kind of touch up and sort of kiss against both shores, but ultimately it's most comfortable drifting, and like that's where Mars sort of sees himself. And Mars points out that, like, you know, you wouldn't really know all you're capable of if you're only, like, you would never know how big this lake is. You would never be able to see all of its shores if you're just viewing it from where you're standing on the land. You've really got to swim out into the water and look around, and that's what I have the ability to do. But if you don't let yourself ever do that, like, you would never know about these other shores, these other identities that you could have. And a big point of my writing the boys and the girls the way that I have in the book is that Mars points out to Wyatt that like the boyness, the boyhood that all of you are treating as like so natural is as performative as anything else. It's as constructed. You have to maintain it, you've got to perform it, and you're making that decision every single time you like get up, get dressed, and like go out into the world. And of course you're helped. Of course you're given a uniform, and of course you're, you know, you're in a society that sort of helps you maintain these things, sort of lubricates your performance, but ultimately, like, you've got to perform the fuck out of that role, or else you're going to get in trouble, and that's a really big issue, and that's an issue that Mars faces kind of head on when Mars, like, I think applies like a lip gloss and like brings down like the ire. Or, actually, I think what Mars's first crime is that he wins a contest, like an athletic contest, and it's this like huge crime because he humiliates one of the boys who sees himself as like more powerful, and Mars even knows that like this is going to cost me because, you know, in the food chain of like boyhood, like someone's got to suffer, someone's got to be at the bottom, and if it's not me and if it's somebody else, that person's going to come punch me, and they absolutely do. And so Mars's intent is to sort of show this, but at the same time Mars is looking at the honeys as sort of this like emblematic version of like also like femininity. And a big part of what Mars learns is that this femininity that society often looks at as like frivolous, like this frivolity that like young girls oftentimes engage with, Mars recognizes as being indicative of like a lot more. Probably it's some sort of camouflage that these girls are using to hide, you know, whatever they're actually up to. And a point that the book makes is that, or at least that I hope becomes clear from people reading it, is that the honeys sort of exist in this like sociological blind spot, because as a society we kind of have this like pathological dismissal of like young women and the way that they engage with one another. We see it as like, you know, like the mean girl trope. We never really analyze the motivation of the mean girl. We just assume that she's mean, right? We never think of like why, what that's hiding, who taught her to like, you know, be this like bitch. And Mars is sort of the one person to like look at that and think like, okay, it's not simply just the way that girls are. There's got to be a reason behind this. These girls are too smart, they're too kind, and they're too savvy to just simply be doing this like out of convenience. So the only other choice is camouflage. And you know, you have to find out what that is, but yeah.
I very much got chills from this answer.
Oh, really?
And I do think, and I've told you this already, I do think it comes across very well and very capably in the book, like this kind of approach to gender performance as camouflage, in the way that like choosing a performance of gender is very intentional in itself as well. And like it can both be empowering and it can disguise a lot of sins.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I really loved it.
Now, wait. In A Lesson in Vengeance, you have so it's an all-girls school, right? I remember reading about, you had like done an interview where like, oh, like men do not appear in this book. Like, I don't think there's even like a he pronoun.
No, there's not.
I love that. What was sort of your reasoning around like kind of carving out such a distinct space specifically for like femmes and for girls, and then also you actually disrupt it because you have like a non-binary character
Mhm.
in the book too, and I would love to like hear about the logic of like introducing that person, what they represent.
Yeah, so talk about AP English.
This is, yeah, and actually you gotta give me
Taste
questions.
of my own medicine.
This is just what our like casual fireside conversations are like.
Yeah, this is how we talk when we're like hanging out on Ryan's couch.
Yeah, it's the exact same conversation.
What do they represent? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think that there's like a couple of reasons behind it. So one of them is that I did want to talk about, like you were talking about how queer characters have their own stories to tell. There are stories that only queer characters can tell
Yeah.
or can be involved in. And I very much felt that way about like women and femme people as well. That like our whole universes, whole societies, whole sets of like laws and social norms and mores that it only exist in like effeminate communities or communities that are based around women and femme people. And I wanted to explore like both what those are and like how they can help people heal, but also how they can like in themselves be a weapon.
Yeah.
And the best way to do that, it seemed to me, was to like very much limit it to that group and to have those voices be the only ones that are heard. So you're both seeing women like and femmes be like the heroes and do the good things, but they're also responsible for all of the bad things that happen in the book. Like they are at every level of the plot, influencing everything. Nothing is ever like although like the patriarchy like exists, you know, as a concept, I guess, in every book. Like you can't escape like the social structure that exists in the real world, even in a book where you're like intentionally not writing any men.
Right.
But like at least like with the conflicts that they're having, even if those are influenced and shaped by the existence of maleness in like the broader world around them, the way that they're playing out is very much like between the women and between the femmes. And so I'd say that that's like one way. It's like I'm trying to let them like write their own narratives and like set their own standards by which they will be judged. But also I really liked the idea that like some guy would like read this book and be like, something's missing. Oh wait, it's my representation.
Yeah, like, where am I at Dalloway at boarding school? I think that's lovely. I think that we should deprive people of things from time to time. It gives things depth.
It's healthy.
It's
just-
nice.
Yeah.
Anyways.
Alright, let's see, back to my list.
Yeah.
So all of your books really pack an emotional gut punch. So what do you think is key to maximally traumatizing your readers?
Well, the nice thing about writing horror is that I could finally unmask myself as like kind of masochistic when I like sit down to write. Because I've written fantasy, and now I've written like romantic comedy, and there was definitely a goal to kind of like put emotionality into those things. But finally, I feel like what I love about horror is the like immediacy and the rawness that it allows you to kind of dig into, because the intent of it is to kind of cut through all of like the minutia of like other storytelling and like really provide something unsettling, and to really kind of tap into like something either like so raw or so resonant that it like unsettles and spooks a person. And so I don't know that I have the answer, because I'm quite frankly kind of new. This is my first horror novel, so it's sort of my first time out like really giving it a go. But what I will say is that like anything that is in this book that is like unsettling, anything that like feels like a little too surreal, is probably like from my own life in some way. Like the a lot of like the fears in the book, for instance, like come down to like bees, for instance. All right, honeys, it's about bees, right? There are bees in the book. I don't have like a fear of bees in like the way that like someone who's like allergic to bees would, but they've always like really frightened and really unsettled me. And to sort of face that fear and to like do research for this book, like I went beekeeping. We went beekeeping famously in the Catskills, and like I got to like handle bees, and then I also like looked into like the way that like they operate as a hive, and I've like done all sorts of things to kind of like encounter that fear, and to sort of sit down with the things that scare me to figure out why they scare me, and to eventually kind of talk to myself about those things so that I could talk to a reader about those things. And so I think the result of that, just from what I've seen so far about like early reactions, is that people feel like there's a lot of gravity behind like the scary moments in the book, and almost always it's because they're the things that actually scare me.
I feel like that's generally a good way to approach writing books, right? Like if you want someone to be scary, write about things you find scary. If you want it to be romantic and cute. Like, what makes you go like,
Right.
yeah, and you did a very good job with it. And I have another bee-related
Oh,
question.
I'm ready. Yeah.
Okay.
I love talking about bees.
Because you were talking about how like you and to a certain extent we like went beekeeping, right?
Mhm.
Like you did all this research for the book. You like went to various summer camps.
Yeah.
You really like delved in deep and did all the hard work on it. And so I wanted to know like more about the kind of research that you did, because
Yeah.
I think it's very impressive, and I think people deserve to know. And also whether or not you worried about misrepresenting the bee community.
Yeah, I was very worried that I was. Okay, so I think you know the story, but I don't think anyone else here would. But so okay. I'm always worried about the reception of my books, but at this point I'm not worried about the humans that read them. I was worried about the bees that would sit down and read this book. Because in the beekeeping community, there's a lot of like rules, and obviously like there's a lot of scientists, and I was very worried about kind of getting certain facets of what is like a very ancient tradition wrong. Like beekeeping is a very precious thing to almost every single culture that has bees. There's mythology about bees reaching back eons in every single like culture, and beekeeping exists in many different forms like all over the world. And you know, not being a lifelong beekeeper, I was like, okay, I don't want to mess this up. So we went beekeeping. Well, I went beekeeping, and you.
I had panic attacks in the corner.
Yeah, which is part of it. But I also I took an online beekeeping course, which, as you can imagine, is very difficult to do that through the internet. But it was like, you know, it was learning how to like get started, and I was mostly there to kind of pay attention. I pretended to be like a would-be beekeeper, and instead I just like would pay attention to like the Zoom chat, and I was taking notes on kind of the questions that people were asking, because these are people that like had farms or orchards and were setting up. So I would pay attention to how those people talked. But then after, the professor flashed his email really quick and was like, oh, if you have any questions, like feel free to email me. And this is where I revealed my plot. I actually know exactly who this professor was. He's a professor at Cornell that has an agricultural college at Cornell, and they study superorganisms like bees that help in like pollination. And he's one of the world's like foremost scientists when it comes to like hive minds, basically, which is what I wanted to ask him about. So I took this whole course, and I think I paid for it even, just so I could get this man's contact information, so I could and ask him if he would sit down to do an interview with me. And he said yes, but his response was so weird. He was like, I will, first of all, he like responded off of his like, in like another email, so already like hiding his tracks. It was like, I will meet with you on the internet, but if I ask, you need to promise me that you will purge every single trace of my identity from your book. Like, you will totally publicly separate yourself, and like, I will deny that I've ever met you if I like pull that grenade. And I was like, okay, crazy, sure, like whatever. And I was like, you know, like I'm not doing anything like upsetting with the bees. I'm writing like a horror novel, but like we ended up talking. We had like a great conversation, like hours of conversation. And then at the end of it, I was like, girl, just like, be honest with me, like what's going on here? Like what were you so scared of? And he told me the most horrific thing I've ever heard in my life. He was like, you know, we've seen people like you come around here before to the beekeeping community. He's like, you know, one of your kind ruined my mentor's life. He had a mentor who was apparently very prominent bee scientist until his life was put in shambles by one of my kind. And I was like, one of my kind? He's like, you know, you like media people, you like, you know, fancy artists. And I was like, what possibly could have been so damaging to this man's career? Like, what got made because of this man's consultation that was so inaccurate and so misrepresented to like bees that like this man's career, his academic career, was unsalvageable? And it was Jerry Seinfeld's The Bee Movie. Yeah, which is famously horrific. And he like told, I can't name this person because I did promise that I would publicly sever myself if ever he asked for it. But I couldn't, I think I do thank him in the acknowledgements. Please don't go looking for him. But he was like, yeah, like, my like mentor was a consultant for like DreamWorks on like The Bee Movie. He's like thanked in the credits, and after that movie came out, like, he couldn't show his face ever again at, like, in bee society. And so I promised this man that I would not do the same thing, but I was not writing a sequel, and you know, I wrote the book, and I sent it to him, and I've never heard back. So it could be over for the bees. You never know. Are we at time?
Do you guys want to take some questions? We have
Yeah.
time for some questions
It's
and
time
stuff,
for
yeah.
audience questions. So, yeah.
Why do you mention Applebee 3 times in the book?
Okay. So Applebee's. The question is, why do I mention Applebee's 3 times in the book? Well, first of all, it's a pun. Applebee's.
Bees.
Yeah, there you go. But no, I don't know that there's anything. Basically, Mars and his family on their way up to camp stop at Applebee's, and I thought it'd be just a funny place for a breakdown. Mars sort of breaks down. There's a line that's there's nothing gayer than stopping in an Applebee's restroom while Rihanna's S&M plays on the loudspeakers. Which I maintain, this is part of the queer experience.
What is with us in Applebee's apps?
I don't know. Yeah, the 2-for-1.
Yeah.
The irresistibles.
thing.
They're irresistible. Yeah. I don't know. I thought it'd be funny. There's no real. I don't know. Maybe I will also intellectualize this as well. I'll have a better answer for you in a year. Was there another? Did you have a question?
So you grew up in West Hartford,
Mm-hmm.
and what high school did you go to?
I went to Hall High School.
Huh? Okay.
Yeah.
So you graduated from there?
Yes, I did graduate.
Okay.
Yeah. Carol Blavis was my English teacher.
Did you take any science courses?
Yeah. Miss Clark was my AP bio teacher, and I didn't get into AP Chem. And I did earth science and environmental sciences.
So you didn't take any chemistry?
I don't think I took any chemistry.
All right. So Mrs. Nicola Como doesn't sound familiar?
Is that you?
No.
Okay. Ask yourself as my high school teacher. Of course, you.
No! I am not a chemistry teacher. How old are you, may I ask?
I'm 31.
Okay.
Yeah.
Probably
I
would
graduated
have
in 2009.
She probably would have been there.
Okay. All right. Maybe. I don't know. I think Karuk was the chem teacher.
How about Joan Pease?
Oh yeah, Miss Pease.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Yes. Are you from Hall? Is that what's going on here?
No, I'm
Okay.
not.
Oh, you just want to know.
But I know those people.
Yeah.
So what? And they taught in West Hartford.
Yeah.
Okay, so why are you a writer and not a doctor?
I'm squeamish. I can't handle the. Which now I'm writing horror, so clearly we've made it a balanced circle. I somehow found my way to it, but I don't know. It's a great question. You know what it is?
Squeamish is a good answer.
Squeamish is
I'll take
fine.
that.
I'm also incredible at lying.
Well, you didn't think that there were any good neuroscience co-ops.
That's true. I was a neuroscientist kid until they told me that my whole life would be spent doing testing on rats,
Oh,
and I couldn't bring myself to do that, so I stopped. Yeah. Switched to social sciences. Hold on, I think I saw it. We'll get to it in a second. Yeah.
Did your writing process change based on the genre you were writing, and how has your writing process evolved with each kind of book?
Great question. How has my writing process evolved with each of my books? So my first book, Reverie, was I started it at Hall, actually, and I started it because I simply wanted to tell myself a story, and I spent 10 years writing that book, and I went to college in the meantime. I had a job, I had a whole career. And eventually I was okay, I've got to get serious about this book. So I sort of changed a bunch of things in my life so that I could spend more time writing, clean it up, and eventually that became my very first book. But then a little thing called contracts happened where I would be on a contract with a publisher, so I had to kind of quicken the pace. 10 years wouldn't cut it. So I got a lot faster, and I wrote my second book in just a few months, and I had to be much more diligent. I researched, I outlined pretty heavily, and then I ended up writing The Honeys in I think it was about 1 month. So I'm slowly winnowing down, and eventually I'm just gonna write a book in a second. Yeah, and it's gonna be terrible. But and actually this has come for me because then my fourth book, which I've written but I now have to revise heavily, I wrote in 24 days, this mad rush in February, simply because I just didn't have enough time to write it, and I wanted to hit this deadline. And I thought in my head, oh, well, this is just math, right? I've gone from 10 years to 2 months to 1 month to 24 days. It's just exponentially, I'm just getting better at this. And then I got notes back for it, and it turns out I'm not. Yeah. I have to rewrite the whole thing. So I'm back to square one. Did you have a question?
Of course I did.
Hi, Mom.
Okay, I'm the mom. So you mentioned that you've gotten really good at lying. Could you give me an example and I'm taking?
Yeah, so at summer camp was the lying Olympics. You go to summer camp, sleepaway camp, and it's suddenly my time to shine. I would show up on day one, and they'd be oh, who are you? And I'd be Angelo. Literally would just make up a person on the spot, and then they'd be you didn't have an English accent last year, and I'd be that's my dead twin. Sorry, which is now become the plot of The Honeys. So I would at summer camp one year, I made up a rumor that there were witches, and then I revealed that I was the witch. It was me. And I would slowly recruit people into my coven. Another year I was really into like demons. I don't know. Every year was something new, and so I would like recruit people, and eventually the lie, which was sort of I now recognize as like live action role playing. I was basically LARPing in the woods, like, but I was really into it. I would like recruit people into it, and then eventually the lie would become sort of like a club. And then that would get a little bit too unwieldy for like, too many people would join and I would like lose control over it and then I would become detested for like the last couple of days of camp. So I'm not that good.
But isn't it true that you've never lied to your mother?
And that's true. Yeah, and that's true as well. That's absolutely true.
He's turning red.
I've got a question for you. Is writing enjoyable for you, or is it something you like labor over and are tortured by?
I think we should both answer this. How do you feel about
Yeah,
this?
I'd love to hear from both.
You go first.
Okay. The whole like tortured writer thing, I really expected that to be the case. Like I was ready for like a lifetime of like pain and carpal tunnel. The carpal tunnel part does come true, but I have actually found like a tremendous amount of joy writing, and even if I'm writing something sad or something horrific, like I don't know, I've never really lost sight of the fact that like I do it for me, and I'm sort of first and foremost my very first audience, and I usually kind of write to satisfy kind of what I want to see in the world, and that has always just given me a ton of energy. So I feel a ton of joy. I absolutely love what I'm doing, and it's the only thing that I can spend 10 hours doing and sort of sit back and just have like more energy at the end of it than at the start of it. Yeah.
I would say it depends on like the stage of writing and
That's
kind
true.
of like the immediacy of the deadline for me. Because like I generally do, yes, enjoy writing. It is like my passion. I mean, I wrote 22 books. I didn't even like try to get published. I was just like, I'm just writing this for me.
That's wild.
Wrote
Yeah.
literally over 1.5 million words of fan fiction. Like, I just like to write, you
Yeah.
know. But I will admit that when I have a deadline coming up, or if I I'm doing a part of the writing process that I particularly despise, or like copy edits,
Yeah.
then like it definitely doesn't feel. It can start to feel more like work, and like not to be like all psychology about it, but like once you are getting paid for something, it is harder to like sustain that passion, because like now you have like a reason you're doing it that isn't just for the love of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes I think that like when the deadline starts encroaching, that kind of cognitive dissonance becomes stronger, and you start being like, well, I'm just like doing this to get to the deadline.
Yeah.
Like I'm not doing this anymore like because I love this story. Even if you do, like
Yeah.
it's just you get so in your head about it. And so I'm trying to get better about like not writing last minute anymore, because I feel like that just like eats so much of the passion out of it.
Right. It's good to recognize that there's a depth of experiences that kind of come with it too. And I don't want people to think that like I have joy all the time forever.
If you
Definitely
do,
not
that's
during copy
beautiful
edit.
and pure.
No, that's like I definitely don't have like a step Forwardian positivity around it. I'm just talking like generally.
Yeah, I would say generally, like if I had to like choose one, right? Like yeah, I love it. Like I don't want to do anything else. Like
Mm-hmm.
I recently quit my job to do this.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Exclusively. Like yeah.
That's awesome.
Well, I don't want to take the last question. Does anybody else have a question? Yeah, let's go in the back, and then we will have the signing line. So if you have a question you'd like to answer, ask them afterward. Yeah.
So you just mentioned your audience, and I teach high school, and I am new to your work, which sounds really great, and I'm excited to delve in. Do you think that your audience is high school kids? Like, I mean, is that an appropriate audience for these books?
Yes, yeah. So they're in the YA market, so they're firmly aimed at 14 plus. That said, so a lot of writers, YA writers specifically, will be like, I only write for teens. Like teens are the only people I consider, and I always do sort of add a caveat to that, because teens are first and foremost the people that I consider. I've sort of decided in my writing to kind of take a pedagogic approach with a lot of the things that I'm writing about. I do want to teach or moralize on certain things that are important to me. But I also recognize that a lot of queer people didn't have these types of books when they were teenagers, and a lot of them, and sort of their cravings for stories, have sort of been arrested in a time where they never really got that representation. So I'm happy to provide books for queer adults, queer people of any age to sort of disappear into. So yeah, but they are 14s, and this is true for Victoria as well.
Excellent. Well, I'm sure we could keep talking for quite a while longer, but we want to make sure that we have time for the signing, that you guys can get your book signed. There are books to buy at the registers in there if you haven't, or if you have anything else. Ryan will be over there, and we've got a spot. If you ask Victoria nicely, she might sign something for you also.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. everyone.